Stay tuned because we are going to start painting our Pennywise the Evil Clown from It right here on the first layer. Hey, thanks for joining me here on the first layer. As I said at the top of the show, we are painting Pennywise today. We've got a lot to get to. If you haven't watched our color science episode, which was done on Monday, please go back and watch that. Get some tips and tricks about different paints. We are going to be using the Liquitex brand of paints today. These are the paints I showed on Monday. Now, we're not sponsored by Liquitex. This is full disclosure. These are paints right out of my own collection, and I use them all the time when I'm painting. Now, we're going to get our brushes together. I'm going to get some water. We're going to get some paper towel, a lot of paper towel, and we are going to start painting Pennywise. So let's get at it. So if you were with me on Monday and watched Monday's show, you would know that we have some paints here that we're going to use to paint our Pennywise Christmas Clown. Now, the Pennywise Christmas Clown is a model by innov3d.co.uk. So if you go to their website, you can find the Pennywise model for roughly, I think it's around $5. I can't remember off the top of my head. But we're going to start with the paint. Now, if you haven't seen Monday's show about paint science, then go back and watch Monday's show, and I will wait for you to do that. All right, so let's get into the paint. We're going to start with the two colors that we need to start on this part of the body. And we've got some water here for our brushes. We've also got our brushes right here, and we have our model, our Pennywise. So let's mix up some paint. So we know that blue and yellow make green, and the bodice on this costume is green. It's a very light pastel green, but it is green nonetheless. So let's start with that. So we're going to take a little bit of blue, put some on our palette. I'm going to take a little bit of yellow. And right now what we're doing is we're just making a base green. We're going to lighten it up as well. So we're going to take a little bit of yellow, maybe about the same amount, roughly. There we go. And we're going to mix those up. We're also going to use a little bit of retarder, and we're going to use a little bit of our additive because we don't want this paint to dry up too fast. So we'll take our big brush. You see we've got the paint down there on the table, and we're just going to mix those two together. Now this is going to be a fairly dark green to start off with, and that's okay, because that's what we want. We want that nice dark green, but we want to make sure that this is all mixed up really, really well, so that all of our color is thoroughly mixed. Because if we don't have it thoroughly mixed, what happens is that we start to end up with streaks in our color. Now I know that looks like a pretty dark green, and it is a pretty dark green for all intent and purposes. But what we're going to do to smooth out our paint, first and foremost, is we're going to add just a couple drops of the additive that we've talked about before. And we're just going to put a couple of drops in there, 2 or 3 drops, close that up. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow our paint to be a little bit smoother when we're putting it on. Now it looks quite thick, and you wouldn't be wrong about that, being that it's quite thick. And there's a lot of paint in this brush, and I want to try and get that paint out. So I would use a scraper of some sort, and the only scraper I have at the moment is this one. So I'm going to just pull that paint out of there, because I'm not going to use this brush, but I am going to use this paint. And I want this paint all nice and flat on my palette. It looks like I'm making a mess here, but I'm really not. So I'm just going to pull that paint off of there and then pull it again off the brush. And there we are. So we've got lots of paint there. I'll just put my scraper in here just to kind of get the excess paint off it. Now I could certainly go ahead and use this brush. And actually what I'm going to do is I want to lighten this paint up a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit of white. Just a very little bit. And I'm going to mix that in over here because I really want a very light green to work with. And we can see that that's just the right amount of green that I want. But I am going to start off by painting my darkest shade first. And that darkest shade is going to be over here. Now if I want something in between that, as I'm creating my color palette, I'm certainly going to just pull in a little more green as I need it. You see how that's working there and how it makes it just a little bit darker? And that's probably how I'm going to separate these. Okay, so there's a little bit darker shade. We've got our darkest shade, something that's a little bit more of a medium right here, and then we've got our lightest shade, which is the shade that we want. So now that we've got those, I'm just going to pop that brush in the water, clean it off real quick. I want to get the bulk of the paint off of it so that I don't end up with something horrible later on. We'll clean our scraper. When you're painting, it's always a good idea to have a lot of paper towels available to you, because paper towels are your friend. So there we go. That brush is nice and clean now. All right. So we'll put that off to the side. Now, I'm not going to use a big brush like that to paint Pennywise. I'm going to use a smaller brush like this. And this is a number 2 brush. It's a flat brush. And what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to start painting Pennywise with the colors that we've chosen. So we'll start with our darkest color. Now that brush is a little stiff from when we were using it the last time. So we're just going to get a little bit of paint on our brush here. And we're going to start painting Pennywise. Now it's going to look a little thin when it's first going on, but that's okay. And don't worry at this stage about being too neat, but try and get your brush strokes all in the same direction. So once you get your brush strokes all in the same direction, it'll start to flatten out. And that's part of what that additive does. It helps to make the paint flow a little bit better. Now you're probably saying, well, that's way too dark for Pennywise. Well, it is. And I'm going to show you later on, as we continue through this painting, how that is going to change. Now we know that he's got this little waist belt on, so we're just going to paint around that. It's always a good idea to have some reference as well when you're painting. Grab some pictures of the thing that you're painting so that you can get a nice or proper color. And you see all I'm doing is very lightly dragging my brush, and this is going to keep some of the heavier paint from pooling. And we'll get right in between there and there. Try and get in there a little bit. And we'll just keep painting. I kind of feel like Bob Ross here. And if you take your time, your results are going to be spectacular. And the reason I'm starting with my darkest shade first is because I want to build up to that light color so that as I get the model painted and it dries, and this acrylic paint is going to dry fairly quickly. We're probably going to put 2 coats of this green on. And again, you don't have to load up your brush so much that you have too much paint on it, because you don't want to have too much paint on it, because then you'll end up with, you know, just globs of paint everywhere, and it'll be tougher to smooth out. Now your first layer, like I said, your first layer of paint is always going to be the toughest, because you're trying to cover the model as best you can. And we're going to work our way all around these folds. And that's part of the reason we want to use this dark color first, is because we want to work our way around all of the folds in the sleeves. You'd be surprised how much paint your brush can actually hold. So this is what I call my scratch coat of paint, or my foundation layer. And that's really what it is. It's giving me a foundation to put all my other paints on later on. So we're going to continue on with Pennywise here, and we'll continue painting him. And we will come back and I will show you what we're going to do in some of the lighter areas and with the hair. Alright, so now that we've got our base coat of green on, we're going to come back, we're going to put a little bit of additive into our middle color. Oop, that's a little bit too much. And we're going to put a little bit of retarder in our middle color. There we go. Now we're going to bring that color all together with our brush, so we don't get it drying out on us. Now the best way to do this is have yourself an artist palette. If you have yourself an artist palette, you'll find that your paints won't dry out as much. I'm not using an artist palette today. Of course, I am using just plain old piece of an old piece of material. But now we're going to start building up that color that I was talking about earlier. So now we're going to take our middle color and we're going to clean up our brush here really, really good. And once we've cleaned up our brush, then we can flatten that out, because this should be a nice flat tip. And we're going to start to do what's called dry brushing. This is going to be more of a wet brush than it is a dry brush. So all I'm doing is I'm just putting my paintbrush in the paint, and then I'm just coming back and I'm just wiping off, not all of it, but some of it. And I'm just doing it very lightly. So now I'm going to start to add that color to Pennywise's. And you can already see that it's starting to keep those darker folds. I don't know how well you guys can see that. It's starting to keep the darker folds of Pennywise now. And we're just going to brush all in the same direction, because we want to keep those highlights. You may have to come back and come up from the bottom a little bit. But again, we're keeping that up-down direction of our paint. Again, we're not getting too much paint on our brush. We're just getting enough to start to change that color. And we're not putting on a very thick coat here. We're just putting on enough so that we can still see that depth of color underneath. And we're going to go over the tops here because there's some folds. We're going to just work our way around Pennywise here on all the green spots, all that upper tunic. You want to think about where the light naturally falls on your piece and where naturally all of the shades would be. And in this case, we want to keep a lot of that darkness underneath. So we're going all in the same direction as we go around the model. And if you get a little heavier area, don't worry about it. We can always come back and fix that later, and I'm going to show you how. In just a little bit. So right now what we're doing is we're just trying to build up that color. And you see we're already getting a little bit lighter as we build up that color. And again, don't overload your brush in this case. You just want your brush to have enough paint on it that you can move it around. And try and go all in the same direction if you can. And that's what's going to give a little bit more life to Pennywise and use a light touch as well. This is what's going to give a lot more life to Pennywise as we go over the model. You can already see that we're starting to pull out some of that detail now as we make our way around the model. Now underneath the arm here, we've got some heavier green areas, so we're just going to lighten those up as well. Although they might be in shadow normally. Because let's face it, this is a creepy, creepy model. I'm just going to get a little bit more up in here. There we go. So you can see what we're doing as we make our way around the model. And we're going to keep going. Just get all this green done. So what I'm showing you here is a variation of dry brushing. This is what we call wet brushing. We've done our base coat of the green, and now we're just coming back with a lighter color. And instead of dry brushing, which means having your brush really, really dry, we've actually got our brush wet. We have a wet brush here. So what that's going to do for us is it's going to allow us to mix a little bit of this color with the color that's underneath. Because we didn't do a whole lot of drying, we didn't really let the undercoat dry, just so we have a little bit of tackiness, and it allows us to get that color on Pennywise. And remember, you are dealing with a 3D printed model here. You're not dealing with something that's really smooth, like out of a model kit, resin based or vinyl based. This is plastic for all intent and purposes. Now if you get colors elsewhere on your model, don't worry about it. We'll come back and clean that up a little bit later. So we're just starting to lighten up Pennywise's cloak here. And after watching the movie, I did notice that this was really kind of a very muted green. It has almost like a pastel green to it. So you guys can see what I'm doing here. A little bit too much paint there. There we go. You can already start to see what's happening with that color. We've gone from a dark green to a lighter green to an even lighter green. And we're working our way down from the top to the waist here. And sometimes we have to brush up just so that we can get that area. A little bit in there. These are the areas where you can be a little bit sloppy. And when you're putting down your base, and this is probably one of the biggest areas to paint on Pennywise, you can find that, you know, take your time, don't rush it. If you don't rush it, of course you're going to get much better results. I might go over a little bit more in the back here. Come down a little bit. Again, always being mindful of where my brush strokes are. They're going up and down. And that's going to help to build up the color that we need for Pennywise's tunic. Okay, so we're on to dry brushing now. And what we're doing is we're making sure that our brush is very dry. We're dabbing off the excess paint, and we are just going down over top of the tunic again. And we're not going really heavy like we've done with the previous colors. We are just going down very, very lightly. Because we want to get that color of the tunic as close as we can. Or you can paint the tunic any color you want. I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be green. It can be any color you want. In dry brushing, there's a fine balance to getting the brush dry and getting that paint on the figure or on the model that you're trying to do. And I'm not worrying about getting under the arms with this. I'm just worried about getting the very, very tops. And this is what I'm doing to highlight this outfit. Now, if I want to mute this some more, I could actually go over this with what's called a whitewash. And the beauty of this technique, and I probably will do a whitewash on this because I think it's going to call for it. And what a whitewash is just watering down white paint to mute these colors even more. I'm just wisping my brush over top of all of the high areas. Now, because this is such a wide brush, it is getting down into some of the crevices, but that's okay. For this model, that's okay. Well, we can start to see the color variation in the outfit. As we do this. Now remember, this model I didn't sand a whole lot. As a matter of fact, I don't think I sanded it at all, other than those little troubled spots that we had the other day. Now to mute this even more, I probably am going to do a whitewash on him. But I really want that color to come out. Those deep spots, folds in the fabric. So I'm just going to give him another once over real quick. You get some of those spots that I missed that I think should have a little more highlight. You're always trying to think of where the light is shining on a model like this. Fabric is funny though, because it picks up light very, very differently. And there's a lot of fabric on this model. And this is a technique that I used when I was painting the alien figure. But I also used washes on the alien figure, and we're going to do some washes on this one as well. But we're going to have to wait till this one is fully dried before we do a wash. Okay, so now we're there. We can clean our brush. Get our brush nice and clean. Get all the excess out. And now we're there with the beginnings of the color. We're pretty much there as far as the tone goes. I do want to do a whitewash, and how you do a whitewash is just take a little bit of your white paint. I'm going to take a little bit of my retarder, about 3 drops of my retarder, and what retarder does is it just extends the drying time on your brush or on your paint. 3 drops of the additive, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of water. It doesn't matter if I'm using the water that my brush is being cleaned in, and there's a little bit of green still on there, but what I'm doing here is I'm really getting it thin, like thin, thin, thin. I want it super thin. And maybe I've got some more water, and you can also put alcohol in it as well. If you want to use alcohol, you certainly can. I guess I got no water in here. I thought I did. Okay, well, we'll just use the paint water, I guess. That's okay, because it's going to give it a little bit of a green tinge to it, which is fine, because that's what we're after. So again, we've got a really, really, really thin white here. We're going to clean off our brush, get it nice and dry again. Paper towel, always have paper towel on hand because you're going to go through it very, very quickly. And having paper towel is a super good thing. So again, I'm going to do what I did before. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to dab my brush in there. I'm going to dab it off. And I'm going to start to hit those highlights again. And we can see how that it starts to really mute that green. And we're just going to wash down the whole thing with the white. Thinning that white out as we go, so we don't see a lot of brush strokes. You can now see that it's really, really starting to get that pale green. And all the white is doing, again, we're kind of dry brushing, but we're using a really, really thin white paint that we thinned out quite a bit so that we can keep that color from covering up our other color. Because we're not trying to cover it up, we're just trying to accent it a little bit. You see how it's really starting to take that form that we want. And again, this is an area where you can take your time. Don't have to rush through this part of it. What we're basically doing is we're taking the white over top of the green, not to make it white, but to make it more of that soft, pale green that we saw in Pennywise's costume in the movie. If you haven't seen the movie yet, I recommend that you see it. It's actually a really good adaptation of a Stephen King book. And we are almost done here. A little bit of white on the tunic here. Okay, so off camera, we went ahead and did a little bit more work on Pennywise. He's still a little tacky. I did change the color, as you can tell. After going in and looking at some pictures of Pennywise, his costume is actually gray. It's kind of a blue-gray. I can lighten this up, and I probably will yet lighten it up a little bit more. The collar, you'll notice, is sort of a pinky gray color, or a pinky white color. That's just the under part. We are going to dry brush that so that it looks more of a beige when we're done. And I just put a little bit of color on the face right now. We are going to paint that face white and move ahead with that. So let's get started on painting some of that white areas. So we'll just put Pennywise here. We'll grab our white, clean it up here a little bit. I should maybe clean that out a little. Now, Pennywise, as far as a character goes, his face is white. So I'm going to use this brush, my little wide number 2 brush, and I'm going to just use straight white paint. I'm not going to thin it at all. And I'm going to start to paint his skin. The reason that I'm painting the skin completely white is because if you watch the movie or even look at pictures of him online, he's got a lot of caked makeup on his face to give him that clown look. So we're going to just base coat the entire skin white. And then we are going to start to clean up some of those other areas as we move along. It doesn't matter if we get a little bit of white on our collar, because our collar is white after all. The one thing you want to avoid is brush strokes, and you're going to do that as you're going to avoid that as you fill up or do a couple of coats on the figure. You're going to eventually get rid of all of those brush strokes and go from there. So you can see, just like painting, I'm just kind of cutting in around the top there. And trying to even out my brush strokes as best I can. A good way to even out your brush strokes is not to go too heavy on them. Like, don't really force your brush down on your piece. Use as many of the end of the bristles as you possibly can. Use more of the end instead of the whole brush. If you do that, you will find you'll get a much smoother texture. Now, it doesn't matter if we get into the hair a little bit. We are going to do some washes on the face because Pennywise, from what I've noticed, and I could be wrong about this, Pennywise has quite a few cracks in his face. If you see any of the close-ups, you'll see that he's got quite a few cracks in his face. And we're just going to even out those brush strokes a little bit. Now I'm going to paint the eyes and everything white, because I'm going to come back later on and make those eyes a little different color. But I want to get the base color down so I know. Now, we're not going to finish this today. This is going to be running over a couple of episodes But I want you guys to just learn the technique slowly as we move along. And I'm just trying to even out my brush strokes. I'm not worried about putting too heavy a coat on at this point, but I am trying to get complete coverage. And I'm trying to be careful right around the collar of his clown outfit here, because I am going to be painting that separately. And again, we're going to use dry brush because there's so much texture in there, but I do want to keep some of that design or some of that darker color underneath, although it does look kind of a fleshy tone. When we finally put the remainder of the color on there, we're going to see that it is it's going to look more like beige when we're done. And how we're making the beige is we're just taking a little bit of white and brown and we're mixing them together like a burnt sienna. And get right around his neck there. Same on the back. Now, these are areas you're probably never going to see, but I know they're there, so I like to fill them in. Now I can come back with my brush here, and I won't use this brush because it's kind of small. I will clean this brush off, and we're going to show you how to clean your brushes too today. We're probably going to stop pretty soon because we've got a lot to do yet, but I want to do a little bit more on that collar. And I am going to take the white, and my brush is kind of dry, so I'm just going to do some really quick dry brushing on Pennywise. You see I'm dabbing off a lot of that paint. If I put it up here, you guys will be able to see it better. So I'm dabbing off a lot of that paint, and I am using a fairly big brush, which I normally wouldn't do. I'd probably use a smaller brush on this, but I just want to get in there and just start to do those highlights. And I might just bring it out just a little bit yet. And you start to see that it's becoming that sort of beige color that we want. And I'm just using a very light hand to go over. And I am following the crease just a little bit here. Like normally I would come over just the tops, but I do want to get some of this color down inside so that it's not completely it's not leaving a lot of that gray behind. So I'm just really kind of working it in there a little bit, or leaving that beige behind, pardon me. I do want some of that beige left behind, but I don't want a lot of it left behind. So I'm just going to get in there and just slowly work my way around and just try and get into some of the deeper crevices. I'm going to have to come back and redo some areas just on touch-up. Oh, did that one a little heavy, but we'll come back to that. We can just clean this up all the way around so you guys can see what I'm doing. Again, I'm just dry brushing. Sort of a combination between dry brushing and wet brushing, because I'm trying to just give it that sort of off white look when it's dry. Now, Pennywise is still a little too blue-gray for me, so I will go in and I will take some of that white color that we're using right now and come down, and again, just dry brushing, very lightly dry brush over top of that. Just very lightly, just to give highlights. You guys can see how those are coming out. Still a lot of that gray in there, that blue gray. And now as opposed to going up and down, you can see I'm going sideways a little bit here over the highest areas of detail. And you see there's a big difference there now between that side and this side. And it's really starting to come alive in terms of the colors. It's got some nice shadow areas, got some nice highlight areas. And just continue through and just get all those areas. And I'm really starting to dig the way this is coming out. And once we get this white on there, we're going to call it a day. We really want to mix that in. And we'll just get all those highlights, especially here in the back. We can see that it's got those fabric lines, and I really want to make those prominent. So that they show up. Now the detail on this is going to show up actually quite brightly when you see the model for the first time. And like when you see this live, you'll see that there's a lot of color in there. I just put him in wet paint. You see we're just starting to get that nice beige look that I want on Pennywise. On that collar, really starting to get that beige look, that sort of dirty almost look. And now I'll just use the last of that to give me a nice even coat of paint on his face. And that's where we're going to leave it today. Hey, thanks for joining me today. It's Painting Pennywise. We had some mistakes. I made a mistake in the color. I originally, as you know, I started painting him green. He actually isn't green. The color of his clothes are gray, a bluish gray, a very light bluish gray. And I think we're almost there in terms of that color. We don't have to be perfect. It's only for us. I will be finishing or trying to finish this up on Friday's show. We're going to show you a few more techniques to get some more definition out of the face and out of some of the other details like the fur around the hat, the Pennywise embroidered on the top, and so on and so forth. So make sure you're back here on Friday when we try to wrap up. If we can't get it all wrapped up on Friday, we're going to carry it over to Monday. Let's thank our good friends over at Spool 3D for giving us the studio to work in today. As they do every week, we bring the show to you Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Spool3D.ca. They've got everything that you need, from printers, filaments, to parts. Spool3D.ca. Print it right, print it with Spool3D.ca. Until I see you guys on Friday, please remember, if you're new here, subscribe to our channel. we're giving away a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to be doing the draw for the winner of our 250 subscriber contest on Friday, so you're going to see that as well. And then we start into a brand new contest where we're giving away a whole Game of Thrones package, which you guys might really like. What else we got going on? Well, Friday is another live stream, so make sure that you join me there. Hey, listen, if you like the content and you feel that you'd like to support the channel and our efforts here at The First Layer, we do have a Patreon page. It's Patreon/The First Layer. If you'd like to go up there and check it out, we've got a couple of levels that you can help us out at. I'm working on a couple of different situations for people. So we'll get into more of that on Friday as well. Until then, you guys have yourselves a great day, and I'll see you on Friday for more painting.